The power of story to quiet the mind is something we often underestimate in a world that rewards speed, noise, and constant stimulation. From the moment we wake up, our thoughts are pulled in 100 different directions. Responsibilities, fears, unfinished conversations, imagined futures, and remembered failures all compete for attention, creating a mental static that never seems to turn off. We try to silence it with distraction, with scrolling, with business, with more noise layered on top of the noise, but that only leaves us more restless than before. A story, however, does something entirely different. It doesn't fight the mind head on, it gently guides it. It takes the chaos of thought and gives it a single thread to follow, a path that wins slowly enough for the mind to stop running and start listening. When you hear a story, something remarkable happens. Your breathing slows, your focus narrows, the sharp edges of worry begin to soften. Not because your problems have disappeared, but because for a moment, you are no longer trapped inside them. A story creates distance between you and your anxiety. It gives your mind permission to step outside itself and observe rather than react. In that space, the constant inner commentary loses its grip. The voice that keeps asking, "What if?" and "What next?" grows quieter, not through force, but through absorption. The mind settles because it has found something meaningful to rest on. Stories have always been humanity's oldest form of medicine. Long before strategies and systems, before diagnosis and data, people gathered around fires and shared narratives to make sense of fear, loss, hope, and purpose. They didn't do this to escape reality, but to understand it. A story organizes experience into something the mind can hold without being overwhelmed. It turns chaos into coherence. When life feels scattered and unmanageable, a story reminds us that even confusion can have a shape, even pain can have meaning, even silence can speak. There is a reason stories are especially powerful when we are tired, vulnerable, or on the edge of sleep. In those moments, the mind is less guarded. The defenses drop. The need to control every outcome loosens its grip. A story slips past resistance and speaks directly to the deeper layers of consciousness. It doesn't argue. It doesn't demand. It simply invites. And that invitation alone is enough to calm the nervous system, to tell the body that it is safe to rest, that it doesn't need to stay on high alert. The mind is not designed to be quiet through suppression. The harder you try to force silence, the louder the thoughts become. This is why telling yourself to stop thinking rarely works. Thought resists pressure. Story, on the other hand, works with the natural tendencies of the mind. The mind loves patterns. It loves beginnings, middles, and implied endings. It loves characters, journeys, and moments of reflection. When you sense to the moment as it is, stories also remind us that we are not alone in our struggles. When you hear about someone facing uncertainty, fear, or change and continuing forward anyway, something inside you softens. Your own challenges feel less isolating. The mind quiets because it no longer feels like it has to carry everything by itself. There is comfort in recognition, in seeing fragments of yourself reflected in another narrative. That recognition reduces the urgency of your inner dialogue. You don't need to keep rehearsing worst-case scenarios when you feel understood. Even indirectly, another quiet power of story is its ability to slow time. In anxious states, the mind rushes ahead, constantly projecting into the future. It tries to control what hasn't happened yet. Stories bring the mind back into sequence, into a step-by-step unfolding. They remind us that life doesn't happen all at once. It happens moment by moment, decision by decision, breath by breath. As you follow a story, you stop racing ahead. You settle into the present, and the present is almost always calmer than the imagined future. Stories also give the mind permission to rest without guilt. Many people struggle to be still because they equate rest with weakness or laziness. A story reframes rest as something purposeful. You are not doing nothing, you are listening, reflecting, absorbing. This subtle shift matters. The mind relaxes more easily when it believes it is still engaged in something meaningful. In that relaxed engagement, true quiet becomes possible. Even after a story ends, its effect lingers. The mind doesn't snap back into chaos immediately. There is a softness that remains, a gentler inner tone. Thoughts move more slowly. Emotions feel less sharp. This is because the story doesn't just distract the mind, it reorganizes it. It leaves behind a sense of order, a reminder that not every thought needs immediate attention, that not every feeling needs to be analyzed or fixed. In a world that constantly demands your reaction, a story offers you reflection. In a culture that thrives on urgency, a story introduces patience. In a life filled with unanswered questions, A story reassures you that uncertainty is not an enemy, but a natural part of the journey. The mind quiets when it no longer feels pressured to have all the answers right now. The power of story to quiet the mind is not about escaping reality, but about returning to it with clarity and calm. It is about remembering that beneath the noise of thought, there is a deeper awareness that has always been steady. Stories help you access that awareness. They guide you gently back to yourself, to a place where the mind doesn't have to shout to be heard, where silence feels safe rather than empty, and where peace is not something you chase, but something you allow. Calmness is often misunderstood as the absence of activity, as if stillness means stagnation or silence means emptiness. In truth, calmness is not a lack of movement, but a different quality of movement, one that is intentional, grounded, and aware. It is within this state that insight is born. Not in the rush of urgency, not in the noise of pressure, but in the quiet space where the mind is no longer fighting itself. When calmness enters, clarity follows, not as a forced conclusion, but as a natural emergence. The mind under stress is reactive. It scans for threats, jumps to conclusions, and clings to familiar patterns, even when those patterns no longer serve us. In this state, insight is rare because the mind is focused on survival rather than understanding. Calmness shifts this orientation. It signals safety. When the nervous system feels safe, the mind stops bracing for impact and starts opening to possibility. Questions replace assumptions, curiosity replaces fear. In that shift, insight becomes possible. Many of our greatest realizations do not arrive while we are pushing for them. They arrive in the shower, on a quiet walk, in moments of rest, or late at night when the world has finally gone still. This is not coincidence. These are moments when calmness has softened the mental noise enough for deeper connections to form. Insight requires space. It needs room to breathe. Calmness provides that room by loosening the grip of urgency and allowing thoughts to settle into a more natural order. When the mind is calm, it stops demanding immediate answers. It becomes patient. This patience is essential because insight often unfolds gradually. It is not always a sudden flash of understanding, but a gentle alignment of ideas that were already present, waiting to be noticed. In calmness, the mind is no longer chasing conclusions. It is listening, and listening is the doorway to wisdom. Calmness also changes the way we relate to uncertainty. In a restless state, uncertainty feels threatening. The mind rushes to fill gaps with assumptions, often negative ones. In calmness, uncertainty becomes tolerable, even interesting. The mind can sit with questions without panicking. This ability to remain present with not knowing is where deeper insight begins. Many truths reveal themselves only after we stop demanding clarity on our own terms and allow understanding to arrive in its own time. There is a subtle humility that comes with calmness. It quiets the ego's need to be right, to be first, to be in control. When that need softens, we become more receptive. Insight does not enter a crowded mind, it enters a receptive one. Calmness creates receptivity by lowering the internal defenses that block new perspectives. In this openness, we begin to see beyond our habitual interpretations and recognize patterns we previously overlooked. Calmness also deepens perception. In a hurried state, we see only what confirms our existing beliefs. We skim reality. In calmness, perception slows. We notice nuance. We hear what is not being said. We feel the emotional undercurrents beneath words and actions. This deeper perception is fertile ground for insight because it reveals layers of meaning that are invisible to a rushed mind. Calmness sharpens awareness not by intensifying focus, but by refining it. Another powerful aspect of calmness is its ability to integrate emotion and reason. When emotions are overwhelming, reason shuts down. When reason dominates, emotion is suppressed. Insight lives in the integration of both. Calmness allows emotions to be felt without being overwhelming and thoughts to be examined without becoming cold or detached. In this balanced state, insight is not just intellectually accurate, but emotionally true. It resonates. It feels right because it aligns both head and heart. Calmness also breaks the cycle of repetitive thinking. Much of mental noise comes from thoughts looping without resolution. Calmness interrupts these loops by reducing their emotional charge. When a thought no longer feels urgent or threatening, it loses momentum. As these loops dissolve, mental energy is freed. That energy can then be directed toward deeper understanding rather than constant rumination. Insight emerges in the space left behind. In calmness, we also gain perspective on time. Stress compresses time, making everything feel immediate and overwhelming. Calmness expands time. It creates a sense of spaciousness where we can see beyond the present moment. This expanded perspective allows us to connect current experiences with past lessons and future possibilities. Insight often comes from these connections, from seeing how seemingly separate moments fit into a larger narrative. Calmness does not mean disengagement from life. It means engagement without inner resistance. From this place, actions become more precise, decisions more aligned, and responses more thoughtful. Insight informs action, but only when the mind is calm enough to recognize it. A restless mind may stumble upon truth, but it rarely trusts it. A calm mind recognizes insight as a quiet certainty rather than a loud conviction. Perhaps the most profound gift of calmness is that it reconnects us to our intuitive intelligence. Beneath conscious thought lies a deeper knowing shaped by experience, pattern recognition, and embodied wisdom. This knowing speaks softly. It cannot be heard over the noise of anxiety and urgency. Calmness turns down the volume of mental chatter so that this inner voice can finally be heard. When it speaks, it does not shout. It offers insight as a gentle nudge, a subtle sense of direction, a quiet clarity. In a world that glorifies speed and constant reaction, choosing calmness can feel counterintuitive. Yet it is precisely this choice that unlocks the depth we seek. Insight is not something we force into existence. It is something we allow. Calmness is the catalyst because it creates the conditions where understanding can emerge naturally without strain or struggle. It is in calmness that the mind remembers how to see clearly, how to connect deeply, and how to recognize truth not as something distant or abstract, but as something already present, waiting to be noticed. Rest is often mistaken for retreat, as if stepping back means giving up or slowing down means falling behind. In a culture that celebrates constant effort and relentless motion, rest is sometimes framed as an indulgence, a pause taken only when everything else is finished. But this belief quietly drains us. Rest is not an escape from life, it is preparation for it. It is the unseen work that makes meaningful action possible. Without rest, effort becomes reckless. With rest, effort becomes intentional. The body understands this truth instinctively. Muscles do not grow stronger during exertion, but during recovery. The mind is no different. When we push without pause, clarity fades, judgment weakens, and even our strongest intentions begin to fray. Rest restores more than energy, it restores perspective. It allows the mind to step out of survival mode and return to a state where it can think, feel, and choose with balance. In this way, rest is not passive, it is quietly productive. Many people resist rest because they fear what will surface in stillness. When movement stops, unresolved thoughts and emotions often rise to the surface. Discomfort can feel louder in silence, but this discomfort is not a sign that rest is dangerous. It is a sign that rest is honest. It reveals what constant business has been covering. Facing this inner landscape is not escape, it is preparation for a more grounded way of living. True rest recalibrates our internal compass. When we are exhausted, we mistake urgency for importance. Everything feels critical and every decision feels heavy. Rest resets these distortions. It brings proportionality back into focus. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What felt confusing goes beyond physical recovery. Rest reconnects us with intention. In constant motion, we often move on autopilot, driven by habits, expectations, and external pressure. Rest interrupts this cycle. It creates a pause where we can ask why we are doing what we are doing in the first place. This reflective space is where alignment is restored. Preparation without alignment leads to burnout. Preparation grounded in rest leads to purpose. Sleep, stillness, and moments of quiet allow the mind to integrate experience. During rest, the brain processes information, consolidates memory, and forms new connections. Insights that elude us during the day often emerge after rest, not because we worked harder, but because we stopped. This integration is essential for growth. Without it, experience remains fragmented and lessons remain unlearned. Rest also strengthens trust. When we allow ourselves to rest, we practice trusting that the world will not fall apart in our absence. This trust is subtle but transformative. It loosens the grip of control and opens space for adaptability. Preparation rooted in control is rigid. Preparation rooted in rest is flexible. It allows us to meet change with curiosity rather than fear. Many people view rest as something to earn. They believe they must exhaust themselves before they are allowed to pause. But rest is not a reward for productivity. It is a requirement for sustainability. When rest is postponed indefinitely, exhaustion accumulates and the cost is paid later in the form of diminished health, creativity, and joy. Choosing rest earlier is not weakness, it is foresight. Rest prepares us for challenges not by shielding us from difficulty, but by strengthening our capacity to meet it. A rested mind can hold complexity without collapsing into overwhelm. A rested body can endure strain without breaking. A rested spirit can face uncertainty without losing hope. This resilience is built quietly in moments that may look unremarkable from the outside, but are profoundly consequential on the inside. Even rest that feels small matters. A few moments of stillness, a deliberate breath, an intentional pause can reset the nervous system and shift the tone of an entire day. Preparation is not always dramatic. Often it is subtle, accumulated over time through consistent care. These small acts of rest compound, creating a foundation of stability that supports greater effort when it is needed most. Rest also prepares us to listen. When we are constantly doing, we lose touch with inner signals that guide us. Fatigue blunts intuition. Rest sharpens it. In rest, we become more attuned to what feels right and what feels forced. This sensitivity helps us make decisions that align with our values rather than reacting to pressure. Preparation without listening leads to misdirection. Preparation grounded in rest leads to clarity. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about rest is that it delays progress. In reality, rest refines it. It ensures that when we move forward, we do so with intention, awareness, and strength. Rest does not pull us away from our goals. It brings us closer to them by making our pursuit more sustainable and our actions more precise. Rest is where energy is renewed, insight is integrated, and resilience is rebuilt. It is where the mind and body quietly prepare for what lies ahead. To rest is not to run away from life, but to gather yourself fully before stepping back into it, ready not just to do more, but to do better with clarity, strength, and purpose guiding every step forward. The mind listens even in stillness. Though we are often conditioned to believe that nothing meaningful happens when everything goes quiet, we associate progress with movement, answers with effort, and understanding with constant analysis. Stillness can feel uncomfortable because it removes our usual distractions and leaves us alone with our inner world. Yet it is precisely in this space, free from noise and urgency, that the mind becomes most receptive. When the chatter fades, something deeper begins to speak. In stillness, the mind shifts from broadcasting to receiving. During the day, our thoughts are reactive, shaped by stimuli, demands, and expectations. We respond to emails, conversations, deadlines, and problems, rarely pausing long enough to notice what is happening beneath the surface. Stillness interrupts this pattern. It is not the absence of thought, but the softening of mental dominance. In this softened state, the mind listens not just to external input, but to subtle internal signals that are usually drowned out. These signals arrive quietly. They do not announce themselves with urgency. They appear as a feeling, a subtle realization, a gentle sense of alignment or misalignment. In noise, we overlook them. In stillness, they become perceptible. The mind begins to notice patterns, emotional undercurrents, and intuitive responses that were always present but previously ignored. This listening is not intellectual in the traditional sense. It is embodied. It is felt rather than argued. Stillness also allows the mind to process what it already knows. Much of what we call insight is not new information, but the integration of existing experience. When life moves too fast, experiences pile up without being fully digested. Stillness gives the mind time to sort, connect, and make sense of what has been absorbed. Like sediment settling in water, clarity emerges when movement slows. There is a common fear that stillness will amplify anxiety, and at first it can. When external noise fades, unresolved thoughts often surface. This can be unsettling, but it is not a failure of stillness. It is an invitation. The mind is listening to what needs attention. Stillness does not create these thoughts, it reveals them. In listening without resistance, the intensity gradually diminishes, and what remains is understanding rather than overwhelm. In stillness, the mind also learns discernment. Not every thought carries the same weight. When we are constantly stimulated, all thoughts feel equally urgent. Stillness creates distance. It allows us to observe thoughts without immediately identifying with them. In this observation, the mind learns which thoughts are passing noise and which carry deeper truth. This discernment is a form of intelligence that cannot be rushed. The listening mind in stillness becomes more attuned to emotion. Emotions communicate through sensation, tone, and subtle shifts in the body. They are not always accessible through logic alone. Stillness heightens this sensitivity. It allows us to feel without needing to fix or justify. In this receptive state, Emotions reveal their message. They point toward needs, boundaries, and values that guide wiser choices. Stillness also reconnects the mind to intuition. Intuition is often misunderstood as something mystical or irrational, but it is simply the mind's ability to recognize patterns beneath conscious awareness. This recognition happens quietly. It requires space. In stillness, the mind is no longer overwhelmed by surface-level detail and can access deeper layers of perception. Intuitive insights often arrive as a calm certainty rather than a dramatic revelation. The mind listens in stillness because stillness removes the pressure to perform. When we are not trying to produce an outcome, the mind relaxes its grip. This relaxation allows creativity and insight to flow naturally. Many breakthroughs occur not during intense effort, but in moments of rest, reflection, or silence. The mind is still working, but it is working in a more holistic and integrated way. Stillness also changes our relationship with time. In business, time feels scarce and compressed. In stillness, time feels expansive. This expansion allows the mind to move beyond immediate concerns and consider broader perspectives. Long-term implications, deeper meanings, and alternative paths become visible. This broader view is a product of listening rather than pushing. Listening in stillness cultivates trust. When we allow ourselves to be still, we learn that we do not need to control every thought or outcome. The mind is capable of self-organization. Given space, it tends toward coherence. This trust reduces anxiety and increases confidence in our inner guidance. We begin to rely less on external validation and more on internal clarity. Stillness does not mean disengagement from life. It is a way of relating to life more consciously. By listening in stillness, we become more intentional in action. Decisions made from this place carry a different quality. They feel grounded rather than reactive. The mind has listened, integrated, and aligned before moving forward. In a world saturated with information and constant stimulation, stillness becomes a radical act. It is a choice to value depth over speed, awareness over reaction. In choosing stillness, we create the conditions for the mind to listen fully. What it hears is not noise, but guidance shaped by experience, emotion, and intuition working together. The mind listens even in stillness because stillness is not emptiness. It is a field of awareness where subtle truths can surface without resistance. When we allow ourselves to enter this space, we discover that the mind does not need constant input to function well. It needs space to hear itself, to recognize what matters, and to align with a deeper sense of knowing that has been present all along, waiting patiently for the noise to fade. Every story holds a mirror. Though we often approach stories believing they exist only to entertain us or distract us from our own lives. We listen, we watch, we read, and we think we are observing something separate from ourselves, yet beneath the surface, something far more intimate is happening. A story is never just about the characters within it. It is about the parts of ourselves that recognize those characters, the emotions that stir without explanation, and the truths that surface quietly as we follow someone else's journey. What moves us in a story is rarely accidental. It is reflective. When a story resonates deeply, it is because it touches something already alive within us. We see courage because we long to be brave. We recognize fear because we have felt it. We admire perseverance because we are searching for strength. The story does not insert these qualities into us. It reveals them. Like a mirror, it shows us what is already there, sometimes clearly, sometimes distorted, but always honestly. Stories bypass our defenses. In daily life, we protect ourselves with labels, rationalizations, and roles. We tell ourselves who we are supposed to be and avoid looking too closely at who we actually are. A story slips past these protections. When we become absorbed in a narrative, our guard lowers. We are no longer trying to impress, justify, or control. In that openness, self-recognition happens naturally. We see ourselves in moments we did not expect, and often in ways we did not consciously choose. This is why certain stories linger long after they end. The plot may fade, but the feeling remains. That lingering sensation is the echo of self-recognition. Something in the story reflected a truth we were not ready to name, or perhaps had forgotten. It might be a reminder of who we once were, who we are becoming, or who we have been avoiding. The mirror does not judge. It simply shows. Every reaction we have to a story reveals something about us. What inspires us points to our values. What irritates us highlights unresolved tension. What we reject may reflect traits we deny or fear within ourselves. Even indifference is a kind of reflection signaling disconnection or unfamiliarity. The story itself is neutral. Our response is personal. In this way, story: the underdog, the wanderer, the healer, the rebel, the seeker. These figures resonate because they represent universal aspects of the human experience. When one stands out to us, it is often because that aspect is active within us, seeking expression. A story gives that part of us a voice, even if only temporarily. It allows us to acknowledge it without immediately acting on it, creating understanding before action. Stories also reflect our wounds. We may find ourselves deeply affected by narratives of abandonment, betrayal, or failure without fully understanding why. These emotional responses are mirrors pointing toward experiences that shaped us. In recognizing this, stories can become gateways to healing. They help us feel what we have suppressed and see what we have normalized. In this sense, a story can gently guide us toward compassion for ourselves. The mirror within a story is not always flattering. Sometimes it shows us our avoidance, our fear of responsibility, our tendency to stay small. These reflections can be uncomfortable, but they are valuable. Growth rarely begins with comfort. It begins with recognition. A story can illuminate patterns we repeat without awareness, inviting us to choose differently. The reflection is not a verdict. It is an invitation. Stories also remind us of our shared humanity. When we see ourselves in someone else's journey, we are reminded that our struggles are not isolated. Others have felt this confusion, this longing, this doubt. This recognition reduces shame and softens self-judgment. The mirror expands beyond the self and reflects connection. We are not alone in our inner experiences, even when they feel deeply personal. As we grow, the mirrors we are drawn to change. Stories that once resonated may lose their pull, while new ones suddenly feel relevant. This shift reflects our own evolution. The mirror adapts because we do. Paying attention to which stories speak to us at different stages of life can reveal what we are currently learning, grieving, or striving toward. In this way, stories track our inner journey as faithfully as any journal. Every story holds a mirror not because it tells us who we are, but because it invites us to look. It offers a reflection without forcing interpretation. Whether we accept what we see is our choice. But the opportunity is always there, and listening closely to the stories that move us, unsettle us, or inspire us, we gain insight not just into the narrative, but into ourselves, discovering that the most powerful stories are not the ones we consume, but the ones that quietly help us recognize who we have been all along. Transformation begins where fear ends, though fear often disguises itself as caution, logic, or even responsibility. It speaks in convincing tones, warning us to stay where we are, to not risk too much, to not want too much. Fear does not always feel dramatic. More often, it feels reasonable. It tells us that now is not the right time, that we are not ready, that others are better suited, that the cost is too high. In believing these messages, we remain unchanged, mistaking safety for stability and familiarity for fulfillment. Fear's greatest strength is not that it overpowers us, but that it keeps us standing still. It narrows our vision until all we can see is what might go wrong. In this narrowed state, the mind becomes protective rather than creative. We plan to avoid loss instead of pursuing growth. Yet transformation does not occur in avoidance. It occurs in expansion, and expansion begins the moment fear no longer dictates our choices. Ending fear does not mean eliminating it. Fear is a natural response to the unknown. It arises whenever we approach the edge of our comfort zone. Transformation begins not when fear disappears, but when its authority does. When fear is no longer the decision maker, it loses its power to define our limits. In this shift, fear becomes a signal rather than a stop sign, pointing toward areas where growth is possible. At the boundary where fear ends, honesty begins. We stop pretending that our hesitation is purely practical and acknowledge the deeper truth that we are afraid to change because change threatens our identity. Transformation requires us to release familiar versions of ourselves, roles we have mastered, and stories we have repeated. Fear resists this loss, even when the loss is necessary. Ending fear means accepting that who we have been may not be who we are meant to remain. Transformation also begins with responsibility. Fear often shifts responsibility outward, blaming circumstances, timing, or other people. When fear ends, responsibility returns inward. We recognize that while we cannot control every condition, we can control our response. This recognition is empowering. It restores agency. In taking responsibility, we move from waiting to choosing, from reacting to creating. Fear thrives in imagination unchecked by action. It projects futures filled with failure and rejection, rehearsing outcomes that have not yet occurred. Action interrupts this cycle. Even small steps weaken fear's grip by grounding the mind in reality rather than speculation. Transformation accelerates when movement replaces rumination. Each step forward provides evidence that fear's predictions are not absolute truths. At the point where fear ends, vulnerability becomes possible. Fear teaches us to protect ourselves by hiding, by withholding, by staying guarded. Transformation requires openness. It asks us to be seen in our uncertainty, to admit that we do not have all the answers. This openness invites connection, learning, and support. Vulnerability is not exposure without boundaries. It is courage with awareness. Ending fear also reshapes our relationship with failure. Fear frames failure as proof of inadequacy. Transformation reframes it as feedback. When fear ends, we stop interpreting mistakes as personal flaws and start seeing them as information. This shift frees us to experiment, to adapt, and to grow without being paralyzed by perfectionism. Growth demands iteration, not certainty. Transformation is not always dramatic. Often it is subtle, unfolding quietly through consistent choices made in the absence of fear's control. These choices accumulate, gradually reshaping identity. Over time, we become someone who acts despite fear rather than someone who waits for fear to vanish. This identity shift is profound. It changes how we approach challenges, relationships, and opportunities. Ending fear also expands our capacity for trust. We begin to trust ourselves to handle outcomes we once believed would break us. This trust builds resilience. With resilience, fear loses its leverage. We no longer need guarantees to move forward. We move forward because we believe in our ability to respond, adjust, and endure. At the place where fear ends, clarity emerges. Not because uncertainty disappears, but because our values become louder than our doubts. We know what matters enough to risk discomfort. This clarity simplifies decisions. We stop asking whether something is safe and start asking whether it is aligned. Alignment becomes the compass for transformation. Transformation begins where fear ends because fear keeps us anchored to who we have been, while growth pulls us toward who we could become. Crossing this threshold is not a single moment, but a series of choices to act without fear's permission. Each choice weakens fear's authority and strengthens our commitment to change. In the end, transformation is not about becoming fearless. It is about becoming free from fear's control. When fear no longer dictates our actions, we step into a wider version of life, one shaped by intention rather than avoidance, courage rather than caution, and possibility rather than limitation. Discovering that the moment we stop letting fear decide for us is the moment real change quietly takes root.